Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar entitled Decision Making in Times of Crisis, presented by Alea. Just before we begin, I just like to see a show of hands to make sure everyone can hear me. So you can put your attention to the control panel, to the little hand, and just, click on that button to make sure that's okay. So it looks like the sound is good. So my name is Melissa Toupin-Laforge, and I'm the Manager of Professional Development at CBIE, and I'll be facilitating the webinar today. So we've already noticed the control panel, you have a hand. I will all put down your hands now, and if you have any questions along the way and you would like to either type them into the question box, which you'll notice on your screen, or if you rather ask them vocally and you have a microphone, you can just raise your hand and I will go ahead and unmute your microphone, and you can ask Marie-Claude your question directly. Now, we will keep all the questions for the end of the webinar, considering we only have a quick half-an-hour webinar today, so we'll get through the content in the first half an hour. And if any one of you would like to stay on a little bit longer for a few more minutes and ask your questions, we will be making that opportunity available to you today. I already sent you in the chat the link to our our Google Drive, and so you'll be able to see a handout, a very good handout that Alia Marie-Claude produced, and so it's available there, as well as a PDF of today's presentation. If you have any technical issues, please send me a quick message in the question box, and I will assist you as soon as I'm done this introduction. So just a quick overview of today's webinar. So the COVID-19 outbreak has prompted Canadian organizations pursuing international activities to question their overseas travel of their students, employees, or interns. Although many organizations have already made their decisions in this regard at this point, we are utilizing the momentum and the COVID-19 scenario to examine your crisis management process in order to help you reflect on your organization's position on their risk tolerance level, and as well as the opportunity to look at ways of performing efficient cost-benefit analyses in future decision-making, either relevant to COVID-19 or other issues. And so today our webinar is presented by Marie-Claude Ducap. She is the founder and the CEO of Alea, a risk mitigation and crisis management specialist that have developed custom risk management programs for international corporations, development organizations, private enterprises, universities, colleges, cégep, and school boards across Canada. So without further ado, I'll turn it over to Marie-Claude.
Merci, Melissa. Good morning, everyone. Very happy to be here. I believe that I know some of you that are on the other side of the screen. Very glad that you were able to join us this morning. It's been quite of an interesting couple days. I believe that most of you have had to make some very difficult decisions. We understand that the webinar comes a little bit late, maybe, in making those decisions. Alea did share a document last week, and hope that this document was very helpful for you at the time. The idea this morning is to, as Melissa mentioned, is to capture this momentum and use it to discuss the process of making a decision, handling a crisis within your institution. Of course, we're not here to answer questions. This is not and has never been the role of Alias. What we do is we support you in making those decisions. We help you to have the tools and the procedures and the processes. But tolerance to risk is different from one organization to the other, and it's to you to ensure that your organization is doing the work and that it's shared so that you can make decisions based on this. Here it is. I'm sorry, I'm moving things around here. So who we are, Melissa did mention it. I will refer, since we have a very short period of time, we didn't want to take too much of your time knowing that you have lots to handle right now. I will defer you to our website if you want to know a little bit more about us. We have a small team, however, we have a great advisory board as well to support us, amazing resources in the field. So don't hesitate to have a look at who we are. What we want to achieve today is help you to understand better the measures and the procedures that you should be implementing within your institution to make better decisions. Hopefully, we'll present you with some elements to support your decision-making process. We're going to look into the cost-benefit analysis a little bit without digging into it, right? We're not here to do a math course or anything of the sort. And of course, as with everything that we've done with the CBIE, the idea here with our webinars and workshops and conferences is to increase your organizational capacities so that you provide safer international projects and activities. So rapidly, we'll look at the legal framework. We're going to look at crisis management, activity analysis, and making a decision. Rapidly, legal obligations. It is your duty of care to ensure that you keep your travelers safe. If you want to have further information with regards to your obligations prescribed by the criminal code, I recommend that you turn towards CBIE. We did a series of webinars in the fall, and a whole hour is dedicated to authority, meaning legal obligations and the importance of having governance documents within your institution. Just wanted to remind you that you do have an OHS law to comply to that's prescribed by the federal, but also within your provincial legislation. So ensure that you are aware of this, and if not, well, our website also does present some information with that regards. One other important thing here is that you cannot discharge yourself from your responsibility. I think that some organizations with regards to COVID-19 were thinking about, so what if we just send our students and what if we just send our students and discharge ourselves from this responsibility? This is something we cannot do. You can make them sign an informed consent to risk, though. And when they sign such document, please take note that it's an informed consent to risk. So it has to be voluntary, but also informed, meaning that your travelers know about the risks. Here we talk about risks in general, but what about COVID-19? What are the risks of having your travelers, sending your travelers abroad or keeping them there or not repatriating your students or professors or upper management, whoever you have abroad? So an informed consent to risk will have 5 main components: risk acceptance, liability acceptance, collaboration, prevention, commitment. It'll discuss pre-existing conditions and insurance, and of course, the right of refusal. That is important when it comes to sending people abroad. They need to know that if they feel unsafe, that they are allowed to not travel abroad. As in any other context, for instance, right now in your offices, if someone feels that they are vulnerable and unsafe of working, they could refuse to show up at work. Rapidly, this is also something that's available on our website. I talked about the webinars, the series of webinar. The series is actually discussing the three main elements, so governance, prevention, and crisis management. Of course, today we're looking a little bit more into crisis management. That's the section of our safety plan that we're going to be focusing on. So first off, in your crisis management, you should have a protocol. So jurisprudence demonstrates that you need to develop a safety plan based on 3 elements. One is authority, the other is prevention, and another element very important is efficiency. So you need to be able to demonstrate that you are being efficient in managing and reacting. So you want to have a protocol in which you're being efficient, in which you don't improvise, because improvisation can lead to bad decisions and increased impacts on your stakeholders. Your protocol will be a great reference tool for your crisis cell. Who is your crisis cell? What are their roles? What are their responsibilities? And how do they communicate within the crisis cell, but also with your stakeholders outside? So how do you manage communications with your travelers abroad, with their families, with your partners, partners being in Canada or in the field abroad? So your protocol will discuss all of these things and should be in place prior to a crisis, of course. Your crisis cell also should have, each member of your crisis cell should have a substitute. Reason being, your coordinator might be on vacation or could be also sick with COVID-19 or stuck abroad because he can't come back. So COVID-19 will be used a lot as an example because we're right in it, but I trust that you can use the example to different contexts later on. So that would be your crisis management protocol. Again, in the webinars, we did provide an example of a table of content. If you wish, you can also email us to get that. What's really also important when it comes to crisis management is to understand your tolerance to risk. And your tolerance to risk is, it will differ greatly from a person to another, but it should not differ within the institution. So it should be a positioning that is institution-wide, organization-wide, that everyone can actually look towards when they make decisions. Because everyone is liable when it comes to occupational health and safety and the safety of your travelers and your duty of care, it's very important that it's not anyone that makes any decision. It has to be an organizational decision. And that's why we talk about a culture of safety, right? So that everyone understands the vision when it comes to what we accept and not accept. Tolerance to risk of an organization will depend on the profile of your individuals. And within your institution, it could also differ depending on the segment that's being sent abroad. So of course, students that are 17, 18, 19 years old will be way more vulnerable than, for instance, a professor that's been traveling all around the world for the last 35 years. We could talk about also complacency when it comes to that type of traveler, which has an impact also on your tolerance to risk. So you need to be able to understand who travels, where do they go, and how, what's their expertise and what's their experience of being abroad. So you need to be able to understand that before to position yourself. The type of activity you'll be carrying, of course, in a school versus Doctors Without Borders will have a very different tolerance to risk, and it'll be linked directly to the profile of the people traveling. People traveling with Doctors Without Borders do have all the education and the experience to take on mandates in which their organization is going to be sending them in. What do you do in terms of activities at your institution? It's mostly school related or business development. So you need to understand, what do you do abroad? And what are your resources? I've come across many institutions that send dozens and hundreds of students abroad, but have a one-person, two-person department and don't have the required resources to have, I say typo, I'm sorry about that, to have an adequate pre-departure program and to manage things with diligence. And when a crisis arises, you don't necessarily have the human resources or the financial resources to support your travelers. So you have to be very aware of that. So you have a high volume of travelers with limited resources. You may want to make sure that you send your travelers in destinations that have a very low risk. I hope this all makes sense. An organization must know its tolerance, and I can't reinforce that enough. You need to implement the procedures, the guidelines, your codes of conduct, and training that will allow everyone to comply. Furthermore, it needs to be available. You need to inform your people of your tolerance to risk. So we're going to dig a little bit more into how we could perform. What kind of questions should you be asking yourself when it comes to COVID-19? What I started with when I started thinking about this last week was, how do we divide our questions? So I thought of your destination, I thought about your travelers, about the nature of your activity, and the organization. We could have also added a couple ones, like adding the stakeholders, for instance. So depending on your model and your institution, you might want to divide those themes differently. I think it's important to start with a macro and then go into micro at a micro level. So first off, sorry. So yeah, I just want to say this is the first time we're doing this, right? So please bear with me. We're reacting just like you are. So as I said, you need to conduct a cost-benefit analysis, and the COVID-19 is an evolving situation that will require to revisit your reflection over time. And that being, it could be daily, it could be every 2 days, sometimes it's even hourly. So it's very important to have to be able to monitor the information that's available around about the virus, and what are your sources that you should be turning towards. We're going to look at, I have a list of some of the resources you can look into further down the presentation. So you want to do an activity analysis. First off, understand the context. What is COVID-19? What does it mean? What does it mean in the country where we are going? What are the sanitary conditions? What are the hospitals? What does it mean in terms of potentially creating an unstable context in terms of economy and politics and all of these things. So you need to look at that in general. Then you want to identify the risks. Of course, it is the COVID-19. It is about understanding how it works, what is the threat, and how vulnerable our people are facing the risk. Then we need to identify the level of risk. So a threat turns into a risk when your people are vulnerable facing the risk. Now, how to identify the level of the risk is about understanding the probability versus multiplied by the impact. So that will give you your level of risk when it comes to COVID-19, and that needs to be looked into with scientific data in that measure. Once you've identified your risks and the level of risk that you face in that regard, you want to look into mitigation measures. So are we going to accept the risk? Are we going to transfer the risk? Are we going to mitigate the risk, or just completely refuse the risk? Those are 4 strategies to handle risks. And then if you accept to mitigate the risk, so how do you do it? What are you going to put in place to mitigate the risk with regards to COVID-19? Once you define your strategy, look into your mitigation measures, you also have to look into how can your partnerships abroad or even in Canada help you with that regards. So you want to make sure that whatever your tolerance to risk is, they're compatible with it, and whatever responsibilities you want to give them, they can take on. That's part of your duty of care, to ensure that if you're going to be transferring a risk to a partner, to a stakeholder, that stakeholder is capable of taking on the responsibility, the role that you're asking them. This is also valid for your travelers, for instance. If you think that they should be doing the research about the destination that they're going into, you need to make sure that the people that the task that you're asking them to perform, that they're able to do it. So are you going to provide them with the websites and the information and how they should, what kind of information they should be looking into? Or are you just going to transfer and not worry about it? That would not be the best practice, of course. Once you've looked into all of these things, you have to make a decision. Okay, so we're going to look into this a little bit more. What's really interesting here with COVID-19 is that the Canadian government and your provincial governments have imposed some measures. So it's important to consider the impacts upon the return of travelers. So when I wrote this was a little bit further before, it was before our Prime Minister did shut down our frontiers and had all these measures added yesterday afternoon that are going to be in place, if I'm not mistaken, tonight at midnight or tomorrow. But please check on that information if it's something that's important for you. What's really important is, for instance, we at Alea, we have a contract in Bangladesh, and we are thinking to go anyway. It's an example. We're thinking of going to Bangladesh and perform our audit that they asked us to do. But when I'm making the decision if I'm sending some staff to Bangladesh or not, I have to understand that upon their return, they're going to be asked to be in quarantine for 14 days. And what does this involve in terms of, for that person personally? Can she be in quarantine? What are the costs incurred? And for instance, for a student, it would mean, can they still go to class? Can they finish their semester, et cetera, et cetera? What does it mean for the business as well? For me, having someone that cannot be on the road for 2 weeks. So those are all things that need to be considered, and that's very specific to the COVID-19 right now. I said your activity analysis should be divided into themes. First off, with destination, and that's all information that's available in the document that I sent. I see the time flying. So is the destination affected by COVID-19? I believe that there aren't that many countries that have no cases right now. So this is something to look into. What measures are in place to control the spread of the virus? So are they adopting, like Mexico right now, there are no measures in place. They even held in Mexico City and DF, they actually had held a musical, a big festival over the weekend. Can you continue the activity in a less risky destination? So if you haven't left yet, is it something that you can do elsewhere? This is a lot of a question that we ask a lot to our clients. Do you really have to go to North Korea? Could you do it elsewhere, for instance? And if a country has no reported cases, is it because there are none, or are they just not being reported? So I was looking in the news this morning. Russia would only have 100 cases, and many people are questioning their reporting process right now. When it comes to traveler, how vulnerable are your travelers? So is your student or professor have a pre-existing condition? Are your person at risk? In terms of age, so I know that in Quebec, they've asked for people over 70 to stay at home, thinking that they would be more vulnerable. So look into the vulnerability of your travelers, that's very important. What can be implemented for our travelers to adopt preventive behaviors? So what do we ask them to do to mitigate the risk? What are the impacts of isolating them once they've returned? What about insurance? Are they insured for COVID-19? And if they actually contract the virus, can you ensure that your travelers have the appropriate reactive behaviors to reduce the potential impacts? So let's say I would be sending my staff to Bangladesh. I would be making sure that they are informed and trained in a way that upon their return, if they are in quarantine or infected, that they know what to do to not spread COVID-19. In terms of your activity, what's the nature of your activity, and is it increasing your risks of contracting COVID-19? So we have some clients in schools that have interns abroad in hospitals. So is this putting them at a higher risk? Is it possible to postpone your activity to a later time? So to be honest, right now, I'm talking with Action Against Hunger to postpone our mandate to Bangladesh, hoping that they will say yes and that we're not going to lose the contract. Is it possible to do some of the activity without traveling abroad? And what are the impacts of actually canceling the activity? And that is an important question. So for some businesses that are operating abroad, we're talking about mining companies, for instance, what does it mean to cancel an operation that's going abroad? And for some, it means hundreds of thousands of dollars every day. So that will increase our tolerance to risk. What about your organization? What kind of questions you should be asking yourself? So it's a public health issue. So what is your organization's responsibility in terms of contributing to the measures in place? So that's very important too. It can actually have a direct link with your reputation and credibility. If your travelers contract the virus, can it actually jeopardize your operations? So if you have one person abroad and they're in charge of so much, what if they contract the virus and they're being sick, or if they come back with the disease, how can this impact your organization? And I just mentioned what are the risks related to your reputation. One thing that's very important right now is that I'm starting to hear more and more about students being stranded abroad and professors being stranded abroad that are struggling to come back to Canada. Make sure that you tell them to not speak to the media, and because that might have an impact on your reputation. You want to control the message, you want to control the information, and make sure that whoever is speaking with the media is providing has a clear line of communication, and that everyone is on board with the same message. Very, very important. So when it comes to making a decision, again, what is your tolerance to risk? I understand that might not be in place right now. That might be something to put on your list of things to do within the next couple months. Especially if school is not reinstated, you might have quite a bit of time to look into this. You want to look at your level of risk. You want to look at mitigation. Can we mitigate the risk? And can we mitigate it to a level? And when we bring back to different, when we've mitigated, we talk about a residual risk. So is my residual risk in line with my tolerance to risk? And if not, well, can I mitigate further? And if not, well, then maybe that's where we decide on not going or postponing or transferring the risk. So that's where you go back to your strategies, your risk management strategies. So, and keep in mind, there's no zero risk. We all know that. You can't get to a level of risk that is zero, but what are you able to tolerate? It always comes down to this. I know you might have travelers abroad. That's when we usually turn towards our standard operating procedures. The SOPs is usually will be a document in which you will have the different risk situations that are most likely to occur when you travel abroad, such as theft, natural disaster, critical illness, etc. It is a complement to your protocol, your crisis management protocol. And here, in your SOPs, you should have one that discusses in the event of hibernation, relocation, or evacuation. So in that SOP, you should be discussing the expected actions of the person or of your traveler affected by the event, and then the actions that should be taken by the organization in that situation. How do you support your traveler, and what are the things that you need to do to resolve the situation efficiently? So your crisis management protocol is not about what do we do in specific situation. It discusses your roles, your responsibilities, your communication procedures. When do you mobilize your crisis cell? What is a minor emergency, a potential emergency, or a major crisis, for instance? You need to define those, and then you bring your SOPs to support your crisis cell. So it supports your protocol, and that's where you would find in the event of hibernation, relocation, and evacuation, because that's basically the questions those are the three options you should be looking into if you have travelers abroad. So hibernation is to remain in a safe place, to stay home. This is what our government is asking us, for instance, right now, to stay at home, to be in quarantine whenever possible, suspend field activities if it's possible. If not, can you actually operate from a distance? You want to relocate, so can we send some of our travelers elsewhere? And it could be within the country, it could be to another country, then that's evacuation. When you talk about evacuation, it's about taking your travelers to a different country. It doesn't mean bringing them back all the way back to Canada. That could be actually right now an option. If you have travelers stranded abroad and your country where you are, the destination where you are, you identify a high level of risk, that being that there are many cases of COVID-19 and the sanitary conditions are not the best, the measures in place are inexistent or very low. So it might be difficult because of the restrictions with flights coming to Montreal, Calgary, Vancouver, or Toronto. It might be difficult to bring your people back. You might want to look into evacuate them to another country where they would be safer. So I've come up with like a decision tree for you to maybe help with that whole decision making if you have students abroad, travelers abroad. So is your current location safe? Yes. Hibernate? No. Is safe transportation possible? Yes. So then relocate, and it could lead to relocate but stay there for the required duration, or evacuate. Is it safer to remain in place? If you've answered no to safe transportation, yes, then you hibernate. And if no, you consider the safest option to evacuate. So this might help you a little bit. And it's nothing magic here, right? It's not, it all makes sense. I'm sure that if you would have taken the time to think about it, you would have come up with it. Maybe you already have something like this into place. Risk management is not a new science. You can find a lot of resources online. So this is something that's gros bon sens, as we say in French, that actually just makes sense. Here you have a list of resources that you might want to consult when making a decision. Those are there. They're all health related. Also, I've added travel agency to talk about how possible is it to bring back our people. You want to talk about your field partner. You want to talk to your field partners, your insurance provider, and of course your travelers. What is it that they want? I was discussing yesterday with a student at the graduate level that is in Guatemala, and she's a friend of mine, older student that went back to school, and she's in Guatemala with her partner there, and she's pursuing her data collection, and she just doesn't want to come back. But what does it mean for the institution? And what kind of document do you have to put in place to make sure that your responsibility is clearly defined when that traveler just doesn't want to come back to Canada? So those are things also you might want to look into. I think I did a pretty good job considering that we started a little late. I thank you for still being around. I see that we had quite a bit of people still there. We're going to take questions. Melissa, do we have some in the chat?
Hi, Marie-Claude. I'm back. We don't have, I think they're just going to be coming in now. So
good, give her. And just as a reminder, this is recorded. So you will be having access to this later on. So even if you have to leave because you have a meeting right now, you can go back to questions. Also, I will, you have all of my coordinates. So if you have to leave, don't hesitate to send me an email. As I always say, we don't charge when the phone rings, far from being there, especially in those times. So what do we have?
okay,
I'm scared.
Are you ready? Okay, so I'll keep the questions anonymous. Our situation is in the opposite direction. We have 52 Japanese students residing in Alberta at the moment. The students are all out of school now and are in homestays. The majority of students don't want to go home. In my opinion, they are safer in rural Alberta than returning on a plane and going back to Japan.
If we go back to here, the decision tree, I think that would be a good one for you to bring back to your institution. Is the current location safe? Yes, then hibernate. As long as your homestay family are okay with it and that your students are aware of behaviors that the safe behaviors to adopt, then and then that you have clear communication procedures in the event that something goes wrong. I think you have a great way of thinking right now, but of course I don't know all of the, I don't have all the variables.
So we don't have any other questions at the moment. So if anyone does have any questions, we still have a good number of people online. So go ahead and post your questions. And in the meantime, I just want to reiterate that you will receive the recording of this webinar in about 2 hours after we close off. And that will include, the follow-up message will include the link to the recording. Now, feel free to share that with anyone in your organization if you want to share this information. And I also included in the chat of this webinar, as well as in the follow-up message, the link to the webinar series that Marie-Claude presented last October or November, and that was developing a culture of safety. Risk management is everyone's business, and so that's available for purchase off of our website, our webinar archive. And so that information is there if you would like. So I've got a few more questions here. So just to follow up on that last one, can the Alberta government force international students home? So that's in reference to what those two questions we just discussed.
I think that's a good question. The law, I'm not familiar with the Alberta law, especially that in Quebec we have civil law and we have common law in Alberta. That's something we would have to look a little bit further into. But I know that in Quebec, what happened is that I think it's Thursday or Friday, the government gave all power to our Ministry of Health, meaning that they can make any decision, any call they want with regards to their spheres of decision, meaning that everything that's provincially legislated, the Ministry of Health has entire power over that. So is this something that's happened in Alberta? I am unsure. Is it something that can take place in Alberta? I am unsure. And then if they decide to kick out anyone that's not a citizen or a permanent resident, is this something that's provincially legislated? I am unsure. Permanent residency, maybe, but not citizenship. So I'm thinking as we go, right? But that's an interesting question. I wouldn't worry about that right now, but it could be something that comes up.
And so this is another question I think that's very relevant here. Part of the situation for institutions concerning COVID-19. What about the risk to institutions from the POV of visa suspension?
What's POV?
I'm not sure. David, do you want to clarify POV? He'll let us know.
Yeah, can you read the question again?
So what about the risk to institutions from the POV point of view? Oh, there we go. Point of view of visa suspension.
Okay, so what's POV?
The point of view.
Point of view. No, they did. Come on. It's like LMAO. So the point of view. Oh, that well. That's huge. I mean, right now, I don't, and it's related. I think your question is somewhat similar to the one that our Alberta friend just asked about her Japanese students. I think that would be how it would work, is that they would suspend visas. I think that they understand right now that our economy, especially in terms of education, our institutions need foreign students. So I doubt that's something that they're going to do right now, in the sense that they're not going to kick them out of the country. Now I understand a little bit more your question with regards to incoming students for the fall term or even your summer semester. That could be something, actually. Of course, this is an evolving situation. If we look at China right now, their first cases was in December, and we are mid-March. So if we think, and it took quite a bit of time for China to put into place the measures that we have into place in Canada. So I'm thinking that potentially in Canada, with the lower numbers of people we have, it might take a little less longer for things to be under control. It doesn't, and visas are emitted all over the world. So we'll need to have also, I think, some a contained situation from all countries in order to have people incoming from different countries. Yeah, I would have a contingency plan in place in case it stays into place for a little while, for sure. But I'm also thinking that just like in terms of the safety context of our country, I think that Canada is also one of the safest in terms of sanitary conditions. So as soon as this situation will be resolved, our reputation in terms of safety in general is going to remain very good. So rapidly, if anything, we're going to steal students. We were stealing students from the United States and other unstable countries or perceived as being not as safe. If anything, I think we're going to get those students that were thinking to go to Europe and come to Canada. So we might see if we're able to contain this, an increase in the number of people coming in, of students asking for visas. But we're all like, yeah, I think, Melissa, we should have like a discussion. Like we should plan something else for discussing.
Well, we could have part 2 as we did last time. Yeah. We usually start with 1 and then we end up having 3 sessions. So typically how it rolls. But yeah, we could talk about that. And if that becomes, if that gets organized, we'll make sure to email all of you and let you know. So I still have a few more questions. Marie-Claude, do you want to take that on?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so here we have, are there any government resources from Canada to support our international students in Canada who are unable to return to their home country?
No, I think that's going to be, that has to come from their own government.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so they should be turning towards their own government. Maybe your institution will decide on supporting them. That's one thing. But at the same time, right now, class is suspended. I know that in Quebec, I'm part-time faculty at Concordia University in Montreal, and they're asking us to still provide classes, but online, and that potentially we might go back into class soon. Everyone has their hopes high. So sending back your students right away is not necessarily the best thing if you want to pursue your school year, and so that they don't lose a school year. But there will come a point that this semester will be canceled, and that's when they should turn towards insurance, their insurance company, and their government for support, or even your institution if you decide that on a moral standpoint you want to help them return home. You could have some money dedicated to that.
Okay, thank you. We have a question here about the webinar that will be delivered on Thursday. Will it have the same content? So on Thursday, we have the French version of this webinar. It will be the same content, right, Marie-Claude?
Yeah, it will be, unless the questions are different.
Okay. Now we are hosting another webinar on Wednesday in English regarding switching from face-to-face to online learning. And so that's happening, I believe, let me just double check the time on that. So that's another free webinar that you're all welcome to attend. Effective online learning during times of crisis. Now that's from 1 to 2 in the afternoon. So if you haven't signed up for that and you're interested, please go ahead and register. And I can send you the link to that as well. I'll send that actually right now in the chat box so you have it. But that will be different content than the French version of this webinar. So I'll send you that link while Marie-Claude answers this following question. We have students who want to rent rooms for the incoming semester, and they were told by the host that they don't rent to them because they come from some countries. This made our students very frustrated, understandably. And so how do you think we can support students while we can all while understanding the point of view of our hosts?
Hmm.
It's a tough one.
It's a tough one. Maybe provide information to your students that they could provide to the potential host. I think it's about education. I think right now people are also panicking. There's fear in our communities, and especially with our governments shutting down our borders right now, we are sending a message to our population that the threat is not only within our country, but mostly outside of the country, especially that I would think that more like all of the first cases were coming from abroad. So that fear is normal. I think it's going to die down. I hope. I think it's going to have to come from educational messages, and then maybe help your students, maybe identify hosts that are for your students that are willing to sign leases for the upcoming semester, and maybe add a clause in that in the document or the lease that says that at the moment of renting the room, the host could, after monitoring the sanitary, like something like that, that leaves the door open for the host, that depending on the COVID-19 situation, that they could just pull out of the lease. I think that could be something that would help your students. But we have to let students understand also that that it could be a challenge. Maybe you want to look into maybe your residences, prioritize international students in that sense, but that's big. Why would we prioritize international students over others? Then that would be maybe discrimination. So it's there. A lot of variables coming into play, but maybe look into creating a document in which it gives it opens the door for the host to re-evaluate maybe 2 weeks prior to the arrival or something like that. Maybe 2 weeks is not enough, but yeah, I would look into that. I don't have clear answers. Huh?
Yeah, it's not easy. You're on the spot, definitely. So I did send that, I just sent the link to that webinar on Thursday from 1 to 2, effective online learning during times of crisis. So all of you should have received that in the question answer section. So if you didn't, just send me a quick heads up and I'll send it again. Now, the next question, what is your recommendation to communicate to students who are struggling with the idea of self-quarantine in Canada? Some students have been concerned of maybe having symptoms, and when they are informed to self-quarantine, a lot of them are hesitant as international students.
When what's the last part of the question?
So a lot of them are hesitant to self-quarantine. Some of them don't know if they have symptoms, but they don't know if it's COVID-19 or not. So what can we give in terms of advice to students who are basically, struggling or afraid of being in isolation for 2 weeks in Canada?
Okay, so two things. First off is identifying the symptoms, right? I know that in Quebec we have a line right now, 1-877 something, and they receive over like 5,000 calls on a daily basis with people wondering if they have the right symptoms. And so maybe within your institution have a line where they can ask their questions, and someone that is a professional can help them to identify the symptoms and see if they are actually also potentially at risk, or potentially they have potentially contracted the virus. So that would be one thing, to have that line, maybe educate them, send a document. More and more, the governments are have more and more information with regards to symptoms and how to identify and all of these things. It's legislated at a provincial level, so because health is under a provincial jurisdiction. So you want to look into your province, what's available in terms of electronic pamphlets. Make sure that you educate them about the source where they get the information. A lot of things are coming on the are available on the social medias, but they're not necessarily the right information. I've read from a former student of mine that is a nurse that if you drink hot water, it will eradicate the virus. That's wrong. And she's a nurse. So you have to make sure that they have, like I provided you with a list of resources to do your cost benefit analysis, because I want you to have access to the right resources. Make sure your students have that. One other thing I would also send in a separate email, maybe that first one with health concerns and how to identify if you potentially have the COVID-19 and the symptoms and all of that, and when to go to the hospital, right? When to, so what you want is to give them the power to act on their health. And that is something similar when you send students abroad. You want to give them the knowledge to understand what's going on with their body and when it is going wrong and when to go to physician to consult. So that would be one email or one communication. Of course, you don't want to bring them into class, right, to discuss this with the group. Maybe give them the measures like social distanciation, quarantine, and isolation. What are the 3 levels and what is recommended? And so right now we're asking for social distanciation. And what does it mean? And if you do have symptoms, then we're asking you to quarantine. And what does it mean? And if you do are sick and in need of important care, then we will isolate you, but that's when the hospital will take over. So having this information could be interesting, and how to cope with social distanciation. So have maybe ideas of how it should be done and to have a routine and so a lot of also give them examples of what to do with their day. And a lot of information is coming out right now. I know that on the CBC this morning, we were discussing the psychological impact of being at home and stuck in your walls, and the stress that it could lead to. And that's what I hear also, is that students, they probably have stress. When does stress become an issue? It's when you actually have behaviors that are changing, such as being afraid of going out and putting your garbage out, or having a sleep disorder and things like that. So when they actually would have these symptoms, you would want them to call in also to that line that you could potentially put into place, or that the province has into place. And then give them ideas of how to spend their day and what to do, and to log on Netflix and to take on crochet. And I know that my gym has put online all sorts of ways of staying in shape at home without having the equipment. So you might want to pull all these resources in and send that to them so that they cope better with social distanciation and potentially quarantine.
Great, thanks, Marie-Claude. Those are really good suggestions. I've got 2 more questions, and then that looks like we've pretty much exhausted all of them. So here we have Philip here from Northwest College. Any suggestions for managing evacuations and emergencies abroad? What are your thoughts on utilizing third-party providers such as International SOS?
So part of what you should be doing when you develop an activity abroad is to develop a country safety guide. So what you want to do prior to sending students abroad or accepting a project at a destination is to look into what's the safety context, what it means, what are the risks present, and all of that. Part of the country safety guide is to develop your contingency plan. So in there, when I discussed this decision tree, when you develop that country safety guide, you should be able to identify, you should be able to make sure that wherever they're going to be, they could potentially hibernate, and if not, that you have a place for relocation and that you actually have a plan for evacuation. When we look into a contingency plan in that matter, when we need to relocate, we're going to identify the different means of transportation that we have for relocation, and in terms of evacuation, the same. So it's while you build that plan that you're going to identify who you can turn towards. So you have a partner that has 10 cars and 10 drivers that you can count on if you need to relocate or evacuate the country. Do you have a bus provider that could evacuate you? Is there an easy access to a boat that could bring you to another island, et cetera, et cetera. So it's when you do that you identify the need to have a third-party provider. International SOS, they do a great job. There are other also service providers that do something similar. It's also about looking into costs. I know that ISOS are expensive, but at the same time, it's all about your cost. Well, expensive. They're costly. And then it's about doing your cost benefit analysis. So if you don't want to be doing contingency plans for your 47 countries where you have people into, then that could be a good way of doing it, that you just pick up the phone and they're going to manage it for you, especially if you have little human resources. At the same time, if you don't have a lot of volume in a country and you have one person to evacuate, you might be able to do so yourself. I think having a contingency plan is very, very important, in the sense that when you look at what the government can actually do for you, is very little. They will provide you with numbers and names, but right now, if you look at everyone stranded all over the country, all over the planet, and the government is not taking them out of there because it's not their responsibility at this point right now. Maybe it's going to change, but at this point right now, it's not necessarily on them to get a plane to Senegal to evacuate that group of, I think there's 12 students there, evacuate them. So I hope this makes sense. It's about understanding your risks and identifying who you need to turn towards if you need to evacuate, and having a third party could be one way of mitigating your risks.
Great, thank you. There was just one more suggestion here that in terms of supporting those students, that they might consider for a 14-day hotel quarantine prior to September start. So that was a recommendation from one of our participants. Yeah. And there's also Red Cross providing psychosocial support too. I'm not sure if that's extended to international students or not, but they have call centers that are available. So
yeah, and if I could add to that, so before we decided to not go to Bangladesh with my staff, and one of the things, because we knew she would have to be in social distanciation or quarantine when she would come back, so I actually had a fund so that she could get groceries delivered. So I would actually pay for that. So that might be something that you want to look into, to make sure, maybe offer a per diem or a little fund so that your students can get that help of a third provider so that they remain in isolation.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Marie-Claude, for this really informative presentation. We always really appreciate, your time and all your expertise in these topics. We did go way over time, but hey, I think it's well worth it, and I think that everyone really appreciates your time and the information. So, just a quick reminder to everyone that you will be receiving just a quick follow-up. Survey, 3 questions about the webinar, just what you like, what could be improved, and also what additional information might you want or need during this time. And so if you take a moment to fill that out, that helps us set ourselves up to providing additional resources to you. So we did mention that we have the one on online learning, and we are looking to provide another webinar next week on mental health for students, staff, faculty, interns, whatever the case may be. So really focusing in on mental health during this time. So we'll keep you posted on that, and just keep an eye on our website for that information.
I just want to wish you all the resilience, but also as a small business, this is a message of public interest. Turn to your local providers, go to your local butcher, turn towards them because they're the ones struggling. We are losing business. Unfortunately, we all have to suspend work for our employees. So whenever you can, turn towards them and make sure that you support them. And I think that will make us a stronger country when this crisis is going to be over with. So I count on you to do that.
Thank you so much. Yeah, great message, Marie-Claude. Thank you so much, and take care, everyone. We'll be in touch again very soon. Bye-bye
Bye.
for now.